Welcome to SeerNova Podcast, Season 2, Episode 27. We have Steve Coleslaw with us. I'm stupid.
Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, that.
Okay, so for the past 38 years, I've been in the industry. Started off in retail. While I was there, I was approached by a startup publisher and ended up working as submissions editor. Quickly was told by everybody who I hired to start my own company, which led to me becoming publisher and editor-in-chief, where I was actually teaching everybody, including the editors, how to do their jobs. And so ever since then, I've been teaching a lot of creators, publishers, editors. I now run the group Comic Book Editors Alliance that I started 7 years ago, where we act as a community as well as an educational resource for comic book editors and people who want to be editors. And I'm also getting back into publishing and going to be publishing some resources and educational material on editing comics. And so, yeah, I work freelance as an editor and have been doing so for the last 30 some odd years. And I find that retail has been one of the best opportunities that I had to actually doing what I do.
Very cool.
We talked with a bunch of editors on our podcast over the, I don't even know how many years we've done this. So it's 2019. What value can an editor bring, or what value can't they bring?
Okay, so that's an interesting question because really it depends on the right editor. Quite often, I've actually had a client or a person who approached me say that they wanted to hire me, but then in the same sentence said that they saw no value in editors because there's no provable value to the reader. And so what value does an editor bring? Well, they bring a different perspective that is separate from your own. That's first of all. Second of all, an editor should represent the readership, the market that you're actually targeting. And that's why mom and your best friend are probably not the people to approach to edit the comic. Because not only do they not have the skills to do so, but they also don't understand who it is that you're trying to target. Myself as an editor, having done this for so many years, I always have the reader in mind when I'm considering not only the story, but how to market it.
So for example, you shouldn't hire an editor who doesn't read comic books on a regular basis.
You know, here's the thing. You can be a good proofreader and have an understanding of proofreading prose, but there's differences between editing or proofreading prose and proofreading comics, because there are a bunch of techniques that we use in comics that are not related to prose. You know, even the way that we use the double dash versus an M dash. You know, in prose, it's exclusively the M dash. The same thing with how we apply, what do you call them, ellipses, and how we separate balloons, you know, to create pauses in dialogue. That's not stuff that you find in prose. So, yeah, you do have to be able to read comics as an editor in order to grasp the specific techniques that we use in comics. So yes, you're accurate with that statement.
Nice. And the other thing I like too is a good metaphor in the marketing space, and the reason why you hire like a consultant. And in this case, that's really what an editor is. It's like a consultant that gives you an outside perspective. Is what was it? You can't read the pill bottle from inside the bottle, right? So like if you know what a pill bottle looks like, it's got a label on the outside telling you what's inside the bottle. And it's kind of like brands. Like you like everyone else tells you what your brand is. You could try all you want to tell them, but like it's what they think about it. So you can only portray to them what you're capable of understanding, what they already see, which is why you need an outside perspective like an editor, a consultant, something like that to look at it. So I do like, I agree as well, like that having an outside perspective is huge. And for anyone who's ever hired an editor and not had it been their mom, understands like, wow, my comic is way better for having somebody else look at this than if I just kept it myself. So I definitely, agree.
So last night I actually did a presentation to editors British Columbia where I was talking about hiring the right editor. Now, one of the things that I presented to them was that every editor has their own skill set. And there's an editor named Jim Higgins who used to work at DC. And whenever he's doing freelance editing, he recognizes that he absolutely sucks with proofreading. So he hires somebody to come in and do proofreading with him. And so just understanding and reinforcing the fact that not every editor knows everything. I mean, I've been doing this for 38 years and I still don't know everything. And I'm not comfortable with everything. Like I do not edit manga because I don't understand that particular, group of techniques that they use. I'm like the North American editor, and so if somebody wants me to edit manga, it's like, okay, I've got a list of other editors here who I can refer you to, but I can't touch it.
That's interesting. That you mentioned too, like editors, like project managers versus proofreader. And the other thing I was just thinking of too is, do you consider, just because it might be just terminology, do you consider editors who are proofreaders the same as editors who are reviewing your actual story, like making sure the story is comprehensible, makes sense, flows properly, has a plot arc, that type of thing?
So here's the problem with editor, quote unquote, as a term. Okay, when you're talking about writer, you can envision what the writer does. The same thing with the artist, the colorist, the letterer. You have an idea of what it is that they do. With editor, you can be a developmental editor, you can be a structural editor, you can be an art director, copywriter or copy editor rather, proofreader, project manager. You can, even in project management, you can be concentrated on the schedule, you can be concentrated on the sales and marketing aspects of the book, you can be concerning yourself with what creative team you're going to put together. All these different things fall under that category of editor. And I was reading something recently where in this article, the person was talking about how the misconception is that editing is editing. Well, editing is not editing because during the day at her day job, working as an in-house editor, she was doing all this project management stuff. And the stuff that she actually enjoyed doing, the quality control, she had to do on the weekends and after hours. So, and there's actually publishers like Dynamite, for example, having spoken with one of the writers, the editor never even touched the book quality control wise. They didn't even look at the book because they were responsible for up to 25 books going out. And so quality control was not under their purview. It was just, okay, let's get the book out. Now, the other thing is, major publishers actually hire freelance editors to cover some of that quality control.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, if they at least cover it somewhere, that would make sense.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I would imagine it's probably similar to like people management. So like there's a general rule of thumb that an individual can only manage 6 people at once. Any more than that, and the quality goes down enough that it's not worth it. And so like the ideal number is you don't really need a manager if there's less than 3 people. So 3 to 6
Yeah.
is kind of when you need that manager to step in. And but yeah, so I'd imagine if you've got 20 books, like if you had 6, your quality control would be excellent. You'd be able to like remember the story you're editing, its previous issues, how they correspond to each other. Is the overall arc going on still? Does it look visually good? The artists are consistent, whatever, all those other details they have to be looking for. So that's super interesting. I'd imagine that keeping up with 20 series at the same time would be a bit complex.
But even for example, at Marvel and DC, because of the amount of crossover characters that there are, you can't, for example, even within your own group, if there's an X-Men title that has, Wolverine in this particular situation here, but you have in his own title him doing something, well, you have to make sure that he's actually on Earth in this book.
Yeah, like you don't actually say on August 17th, 2025, and then also on a different place, August 17th, 2025, Earth 8, it's like the same one, yeah.
But it's even in the same month that a book is released. He's on Earth here, he's in space here. So trying to maintain those consistencies, for the time frames that the character is in the story, those are very hard. And then you have the intergroup issues of, well, I want to have a guest appearance of Spider-Man in my X-Men book. Well, then you got to deal with the group editor of the Spider-Man titles and make sure
in the same way as he does in the other one. It's like, that's weird. He would never say that. He doesn't say that in this one. Like, that's not a,
Or even that the clone saga, it isn't the clone that's actually being crossed over here instead of, the actual Peter Parker versus Ben Reilly and all this crap. So, but even on a level as a freelance editor, working on a single title, there's always that attempt to maintain a consistency of the character. So, for example, what might happen in the first issue, by the time you get to the second issue, quite often the creator will forget some of the stuff that actually happened in the first issue. My character's name was this, and suddenly it's spelled a different way.
Even the great Stan Lee once called him Bob Banner. So, it's definitely I think that's what it was. I think it was Bobby Banner. I think he accidentally called Bruce Banner one time. But that's why he always did alliteration so that he could remember, like Peter Parker, Bruce Banner. They were all alliterations. James Jones Jameson, John Jones Jameson.
J. Jonah Jameson.
Yeah. But yeah, like so many of his main characters had alliteration so that he wouldn't forget them, and even still, he would make mistakes. So yeah.
So the second part of your question, Greg, was what can an editor not bring to a project?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, if the editor is not skilled in certain things, okay, if the editor is a good copy editor, where the dialogue is really strong as a result of what they're bringing to the table, but the proofreading is terrible, and there's a whole bunch of problems with the structure of the story, where, for example, you have a scene that is 2 pages, but really should have been 3, just to introduce details that were missing. How from here to here, kind of thing.
Or one that's 3 pages and should have been 1.
And for example, it's happened with me a few times where I know that I have a limitation of 24 pages to a particular comic. Well, this scene needs 3 pages instead of 4. Well, what am I going to do with that extra page? So I look elsewhere in the book. Can I add that to another scene, or can I create a new scene where that will add something to the story, to fill that 24 pages?
Yeah. Or
vice versa, if I have the need for 25 pages instead of 24, well, now I have to pull back. So structurally, there's ways to do that. and an editor is where that would benefit. But if an editor doesn't know how to structure, or even art direction, if they're not aware that in issue number 6, the inside of the kitchen was designed like this, and suddenly in issue number 7, they've changed the look and colors of the kitchen. That's the art, but a copy editor might not notice that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you got to find the right editor.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I made me think of too is you also want to get the editor involved before the art gets done.
Yeah, definitely. Even when it comes to the script and the script translated to the the layout stage. Okay. Quite often I encounter writer-artists who the artist doesn't interpret exactly what the writer planned. And sometimes it's for the better, sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's a key prop, for example, that the writer has included that the artist has not included because they personally feel, hey, I don't need to do that because I have a different idea on how to present it.
Yeah, or like, yeah, I was gonna say like that same type of scenario happens where like someone mentions a key prompt in one panel, it's the same physical scene, but it's not that prop is not carried throughout the other panels because it wasn't made aware like that was put there on purpose. This is the same room, it should remain there. That kind of stuff. That also made me think of like what's it called, the page flip. Like that's the notorious page flip where like a lot of the initial stories we didn't account for that until we reworked them and we're like, oh yeah, like we needed to go, wow, because this is a physical print, and if you have all the cool stuff on the right hand side, like there's no reason to flip the page if I already saw a cool thing here. I've got what I want. So the goal is to like show them something crazy, make them want more, and to repeat that throughout the whole comic. And so like that type of structuring too.
Like for example, facing pages, because you never know if you're going to, for example, publish a floppy and then a collected volume, always have that page turn incentive on a positive number facing page, because you don't know, depending on how you're going to publish it again in a different format, you don't know if that's going to be a facing page or if it's going to be an actual odd number. Okay, so little details like that. But I always ask for the art because I know to expect that the art is going to be different than the script. And I always tell the writer, never get married to the dialogue, because you never know what the art is going to bring. It could cancel out the need for the dialogue. It may change how the person is speaking in the dialogue. He may have this massively long monologue that suddenly, because the artist drew the character in a particular pose acting, most of that monologue is now redundant. So having that comparison is always valuable.
Yeah, one of the big things that we had done, and this was because of the editing after the art, our very first comic we ever printed was ink, the first issue, because we had issues getting our actual first comic done. And what happened was, before I had gotten a look at the script, Greg had gotten it to the artist. And when we got it back, there was huge chunks of like, hey, you kind of have all this like dialogue and there's not enough panels to like really spread this out. And so you're just crushing the story together. So we 180'd on the dialogue altogether. We literally just threw it out, and we started off by just doing inner dialogue. And so it was all comment bubbles or blocks of like what he's thinking, like narration blocks.
Yeah.
And so, but like your point of not getting married to the dialogue, the story is still there, and the story is great. And now that's actually one of the cool things about this story, is that it has now all of our succeeding comics, like the following in the series, all have these inner dialogues now. So it became a part of the series, which is cool.
One of the problems that I find occurs, though, when the artist changes what the writer has already planned, is the writer becomes a victim of what the artist has done. So if you as a writer had certain things that you were planning on including, but the artist has changed that, it therefore requires you as the writer to change your approach, which may completely change the story that you had in mind.
Well, yeah, that's where like one of the things that we started doing was we sometimes have that issue, but what we decided to do was some panels were excessively descriptive on the panel. So I think I read, was it How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way?
Yeah.
And that's when I learned about worm's eye view, for example. Like everyone's heard bird's eye view, but I never heard about worm's eye view, standard, like all the different viewpoints, what close up, mid shot, and far shot were, or long shot, whatever. I forgot I think it's far shot. Like each of those phrases were. And so eventually, what we started doing was, here's the script, and then Greg and I would go through and go, how do we envision this panel? And we'd be like, okay, over the shoulder, long shot of this guy, right? Worm's eye view of this scene. And we were able to do that over and over again. Like, this is a splash scene. This is a 2/3 page. This is an overlay panel. But then there was times where like, this is what we have in mind. Let's see what you do because you're a good artist and let's let you play with it. And I feel like that's kind of the other thing. It's like being able to work with if you don't have an editor during the entire process, if you're a writer, you definitely want to make sure whatever artist you're working with is comfortable, A, taking directions, and B, being able to free flow when needed. Because, if you don't have an editor during that phase, you're going to get some like weird stuff coming out where it's like, wait, this goes here, and then what happens next? It's like, that structuring is super important.
There's two things that the editor is responsible for. One is mediation if those kind of situations arise, but it's also necessary quite often for the editor, or at least the artist and writer, to develop a strong enough relationship so that they understand each other, okay? And that one isn't going to, one is more demanding than the other, or, more insistent on what they see versus, the big picture. There are quite a few situations in comics, even between Chris Claremont and John Byrne, which is actually why John Byrne left the X-Men, was because Claremont was writing the dialogue after Byrne had actually provided the art. And in this one particular issue, he has Colossus pulling a massive tree trunk out of the ground. Now, Colossus is supposed to be able to lift like 75 tons or whatever. And but the dialogue that Chris Claremont had actually written makes it seem like he has to put a lot of effort into pulling the trunk.
Yeah.
They had already had a lot of issues prior to that, but that was actually the straw that broke the camel's back, and Byrne left a couple of issues later.
The Colossus that broke the tree trunk, yeah.
Look online and see that particular circumstance. But yeah, the editor is supposed to be that middleman, mediator. Now, one of the things when you're working for a publisher as an in-house editor, some editors are very controlling, okay, in the sense that they always have to be the middle person. The artist cannot talk to the writer cannot talk to the artist. It always has to go through the editor, okay?
Yes. So there's no funding that makes sense.
Those are the situations where the book quality actually suffers because there isn't a direct contact. But at the same time, the editor needs to be part of that triangle relationship, because if they're kept out of the loop, then they're wondering, okay, what the hell happened? Why is it like this now?
At that point, the editors now become a director. They're now leading everything, essentially taking advice from the people who are experts in their areas. And it's no longer an editor; it's a director.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
One other thing that is a major problem with corporate publishers is editors have a lot less influence now because marketing and sales are the ones who lead the charge. So they're the ones who make the decisions. Actually, the editors don't.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. And it's like that is, it's kind of why, so something interesting was I was reading a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Branding by, what is it? Al Rice and someone, forgot the other person. But the idea was that when you make a brand like Dunkin' Donuts, for example, we can come up with the idea of Dunkin', like we can nickname it, right? But you should keep the name Dunkin' Donuts. Like don't go changing stuff just to like meet the audience. Like if I'm reading your comic, I shouldn't change your whole story because I have one opinion now, because I don't know what you have envisioned 3 comics from now. And I could tell you I don't like this one plot arc right now, but maybe it's a necessity for this thing over there. And I would say there are very few times where the audience knows better than like the writer. Not that like every writer is amazing, but it's more like you just can't know all like everything that's in their head. And one of the best quotes was Henry Ford. If you asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Like they just they can only know what they know, and they can want it better, but they don't know what better means.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's interesting to like really know that like the big guys are being manipulated essentially by the sales team, and that's probably why a lot of their stories started to suck. Is just because they're flowing with what the market's saying, but the market talks a lot more than they purchase.
Yeah,
because it's not really the market.
So about 25 years ago, outside of just comics, but in publishing in general, publishers started pulling away the necessity of editors as quality control and started firing a whole bunch of editors and bringing in marketers and sales, because they felt that in order to make the money, they needed to concentrate more on that area and less on this area. And so as a result, even prose novelists like Nora Roberts and Stephen King and all these novelists now, because of the sales approach, they are being rushed to produce these books, these stories. While their name is hot and on the shelf, we need to get the next book out as fast as possible. But as a result, the editors aren't focusing on that quality control, and readers are actually noticing.
Yeah, that reminds me of you know who Ryan Holiday is?
I've heard the name.
He writes a lot about like Stoic stuff, but he also, he's a novelist. He's friends with Robert Greene, the guy that wrote like the 48 Laws of Power and a bunch of those books, but a lot of like general knowledge books. And so one of the books that he wrote, though, it's called Perennial Seller, and it talks about making something that, so a perennial seller is like however long a book lasts, it's more likely to last longer because of it. So it's a funny idea, but like if a book is popular for 1 year, it's likely to last for 2. But if it's popular for 2, it's likely to last for 4. If it's popular for 4, it's likely to last for 8. So the longer that it remains popular, the more likelihood it will remain popular even longer. So the goal is to think about creating these evergreen stories that aren't going to just fade away because you're pumping out this material. So you get, someone like Stephen King not doing his best work at the end, trying to make every dime he can from those last books. And the problem is those last set of books really get forgotten. So it's definitely something that I think, people who are trying to make a quick buck don't realize they could lose legacy over it. And you could take these IPs and you could turn them into other mediums, film, TV, video games, all these other things, as opposed to just pumping out more stories just for the sake of capturing the comet as it's passing by,
Yeah. Greg, what's your next question?
So we're finally get to go to Baltimore Comic-Con after I don't know, I think we tried 2 years in a row and we couldn't get in.
Yeah, so it's been
we got in kind of by a fluke. So you added that you want to talk about trade show strategies. I learned some from Dylan, like a marketing tip, to try to put the thing in the person's hand and then it makes it like it's theirs. And that does work because it worked a lot at Saratoga Comic-Con.
Mhm.
But how do you stand out at conventions and attract buyers from a distance?
Okay. So the very first thing is add variety of color and composition to your display. Okay. That's first and foremost because you want to be able to add a visual appeal from a distance and from close up. Okay. Now, one of the things that I always suggest is design your table display so that it has, for example, if you are at the table by yourself, okay, then create two tall structures on the sides so that you're in the center, and that way you're being framed, okay? If you're two people at the table, then put something in the middle that elevates as well so that it's separating both of you, okay? From a distance, you always want something that's going to be visually appealing, that's going to separate you from everybody else. I always suggest that you study the other displays, okay? Learn from how they're doing it. And I'm going to give you an example that I use a lot with comics on a rack, okay? I encourage people to go to the comic shop, even though it's a different topic, but I encourage people to go to the comic shop every week and pick 3 comics that visually capture their attention that are not ones that they would usually automatically buy. So if you automatically buy Star Wars or Batman or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever, don't even consider those ones in this equation, okay? You want the ones that are going to immediately appeal to you, because out of those 3, there is an element that is personal to you. Each one of those 3 also has things that appeal to somebody else. So what appeals to you is represented by 3 different groups now. Okay, if you're appealed to negative space on a cover, somebody else who buys comics is going to be appealed to negative space. If strong color contrast on a cover is something that appeals to you, another group is going to likewise. Okay, so when you're in a trade show setting and you're looking at elements of other people's displays, figure out what it is about those displays that appeal to you, and choose at least 3 of those displays and pull something from them that you can actually add to your own.
When we went to IC3, the Indie Comic Creator Con in New Haven, one of the things that I did was I went around the entire place looking at everybody's booth and talking to as many people as I possibly could. I probably talked to like 75 to 100 people or different tables. And one of the things I did was anytime a table was like, whoa, I took a picture of it. I was like, hey, one second, I'm just taking a picture of this. And that helped me find a couple of different stands that we want to get. It helped me find out, like, one of the coolest ones I ever saw was the tablecloth that they had enlarged prints on them, but it was the tablecloth itself. I went to pick it up. I thought it was real. I was like, oh wait, it was printed on the cloth. And that really stood out. I was like, man, that's really cool. And then the other one that I thought was really awesome was this guy right here, which was a zine. It's like a little 1-page comic.
Yep.
But it's actually just one piece of paper that folds out into a poster.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So much so, when I was in San Diego with Metal Ninja Studios, we made our own doing that same thing. And I was like, that's brilliant. And I want to do the same with us. I want to do it for Mittens. I want to get like a little comic like this, because it's like then some kid who comes up to the table who's like, oh, I want something, and they're like, I will come back later. We'll be like, here you go. Like, you know, it costs barely anything to print them, and it's like, why not get a bunch of those and then hand those off? It'd be awesome.
Exactly. You know, when you are setting up for your price points, for example, always put your higher priced items behind your low cost items, because the low cost items are the things that are going to automatically appeal to people because they're already considering their budgets. Okay. So if you can catch their attention with the lower cost items or the free items and pull their attention back towards you who are sitting behind the table, then there's more chance of making a higher value sale. Okay.
Totally.
One of the other things that I always tell people, because you don't know if you're going to be on an end cap where you're not going to have any neighbors, okay, what I always say is take your stands and angle them so that your attention is within that semicircle. Okay?
Yeah.
That's an important one because you don't know if your stand or your tablecloth or you know your material is so similar to the person next to you that you're no longer being isolated. It's just one eye flow that goes into theirs. Okay? And that also applies if you're doing splitting your own table into two separate vendors. Okay? Make sure that your product is isolated in view. The other thing is by having your stands angled, people who are coming from this direction will see your product that is on that angle from that direction. Because if it's only out flat in front of the table, then you're not catching the attention of people who are coming from the sides. Okay? Color is a major detail, even in how you display your comics in the stand. Because contrast is so important in display, what I always suggest, first of all, is get a display color that will actually make your comics stand out. So if your comics are black, make your stand transparent or white. If your comics are in color, make your display stand black so that the comics stand out. Even with your tablecloth, what I usually suggest is have two tablecloths, one that is the main one and another one that splits down the middle, so that the product that is darker in color can go on the lighter portions, and the product that is lighter color goes on the darker portion, and that way you have that color contrast.
That's cool.
Another thing is try to avoid having your product lay flat on the table. And there's a few reasons for that, because not only from a distance are you not seeing the flat product, but when you're actually at the table, your eye contact with you as the vendor and the customer is not, it's divided. So you're looking at the vendor, you're not looking at the product. You're looking at the product, you're not looking at the vendor. You're not developing a relationship. Okay? And that relationship is what's going to help sell. So things like that, you know, help create interest, and at the same time develop a relationship between you and the customer. I always suggest that if you have a comic out, you're not always going to be available to tell the person about the comic. So create something that tells the person about the comic in writing.
The coolest one I saw was that IC3. Somebody had this, like they had their comic set up, but then like in the back, it had like a piece of paper like this, and it had like a few words. That was it, but it described what Batman meets vampires or something. I don't know. I'm just making something like that, where it's like it's a very quick, this is what you're looking at.
Yep. And if you have banners or posters on a stand behind your table, instead of just having the banner there with no print or just the logo, for example, of your title, that's where you can actually put detail above the graphic of what the character is or what the story's about. That is giving people also something to look at while they're waiting to talk to you.
Yeah, something to read that's above as opposed to staring straight down.
And the thing is, it takes less time, and this applies to, for example, me looking at portfolios at a convention, okay? It's easier to look at art and it's faster to look at art than it does text. So if myself as a consumer, I'm going up to your table and looking at the art that's all the prints that you have behind your table, I'm scanning across, and that's not taking any time for me to do. Add text to it, and it's giving them something to do and giving their attention something to do. Okay. So there's all these different techniques because it's all psychology. Sales and marketing at a convention is all psychology. And so it's just a matter of understanding what I call the P's, you know, your product, your presentation, your personality, your, you know, and even the way you dress. Because I also teach vendors like for Christmas markets and stuff like that, you know, dress how you want to represent your product. Okay? If you're selling, you know, jingle bells and Santa's at your table, but they're standing in a rugged old T-shirt, you're not going to make the connection. Okay.
What were the P's again? You said product, presentation. What else was there?
There's a bunch of P's. There's like 13 different P's.
Okay.
And
so perfume, so you don't smell.
You know, there's product, presentation, price, personality. Off the top of my head, I can't remember all of them, but
I'll look them up later. Now that I know there's 13, like there's like a list of them. That's cool.
These are ones that I created, just to let you know. Very so cool. I don't have them all published online or whatever, but
yeah,
this is material. Yes, yeah. But this is all material that I share when because I create my own shows as well. I host our own shows. So when I have vendors at my event, I offer to give them some guidance on how they can set up their tables and how they can present themselves. And, you know, this product should actually be over here, you know, so it's categorized and, you know, so on and so forth. Because sales is so valuable on a personal level, trade shows are a perfect venue to make those sales. That's why I don't encourage people to put so much focus on getting their comics into the retail, because you lose that personal connection and you become dependent upon the retailer to sell your product for you. Okay, so trade shows are definitely the way to go.
Yeah, like conventions. Our first big convention was SeerNova Comic-Con, and it was like our third, maybe, I think we did. And the spring show last year, there was a girl, I completely forgot that it was her birthday, like during the fall show. So she came up in the fall show, like, and remembered us because in the spring show, it was her birthday. It was during Star Wars weekend. And they're like, oh yeah, you gave me like mittens for free because that's the comic I wanted, and it was my birthday and I didn't have money. I was like, oh, I don't remember that. Oh, thanks. And then she's like, yeah, you're the cat guy. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm the cat. So she came back in the fall, and I think she bought something because of it. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is like you could probably get into retail in the local areas you'd go to conventions at, but like only if a bunch of people already know you from going to the conventions.
What I suggest is, I don't want to go into retail just yet. Going back to the trade shows, going back to conventions. With conventions, because the larger the convention there is, the more possibility of you losing the sale happens, because people go in there with a budget. Okay, Most of the time it's money on hand. It's not their credit card or, their debit card or whatever. So you got to try and make the sale as quick as possible before they move on. Okay. Now, making the sale doesn't necessarily mean being aggressive, and in their face. Reading the consumer is extremely important because some people are standoffish and shy. Other people are more talkative. Okay. So you kind of get a feeling for the consumer when you see how they're interacting. Okay. If they're very cautious, then more or less they're withdrawn. Okay. Those are the people that you have a limited conversation with until they themselves feel comfortable with you to let themselves out. The people who are the talkative ones, okay, are the ones who I find at a convention are the ones who are, let's get this done kind of thing and move on. And quite often, if they're extremely talkative, they're kind of filling their own space. Okay. So they're not really paying attention to you who are trying to sell product. They're paying more attention to what their thoughts are and how fast they're going to get those thoughts out. Okay.
Which those are probably the ones that are best. Like what we were talking about earlier, when you hand them the comic so they can like hold it. I feel like a lot of the people that like to talk, because I've noticed this, you hand them the comic and they just start talking about the comic now, because now everything they talk about is the thing they're holding.
Exactly. So you're giving them a purpose. And it's also giving them something, like you said, something else to talk about besides, I can't believe the size of the show. Have you seen, that this guy's over there, is doing signings and all this stuff. So try and make the sale as soon as you can. So before someone leaves the table, because not only are you competing against other vendors, you're competing against them buying food or anything else that is going to cost money. Okay. Now we were talking a little bit about vendors, not vendors, retailers.
Yeah.
When it comes to retail, because here in Calgary, where I live, we have 8 different comic shops, and each one has a different perspective on what product they're actually going to carry. There's only 2 that carry lesser known independent titles. Okay, they take that risk. Mind you, they are also the ones who, on their displays, have the books so tight together, overlapping one another, that you can't even see the spines clearly. Okay, because they just have way too much stock. Okay. The stores that have less stock are the ones that go to the Marvel, the DC, the Image, and they won't even take risks on IDW or Boom titles or Dark Horse titles, because they already know that unless it's something, a major licensed property, for example, that they're not going to be able to sell to their particular clientele. So from a publisher's perspective, it's worth doing the research and contacting these different retailers, and finding out what their philosophy is on independent publishers and how they actually sell them, instead of just doing a mass promotion of your book. Do targeted promotions to the ones that will actually potentially sell your book, because honestly, there's I believe over 2,300 retailers in North America. Okay, now in North America, what percentage do you think are ones who actually get small press published?
Probably like 10 to 20%.
10 to 20%, probably closer to 10. Okay, because the rest of their store might be filled with action figures and manga And because manga occupies so much space in a retail setting, that means that the floppies, periodicals, are the ones that end up suffering, space-wise. So I always suggest that contact individual retailers, find out what their philosophies are, and create that list that you can say, okay, well, we've got this new book out. We know that this store will not carry independent comics, so therefore we're not even going to try and bother. And at the same time, you're developing a relationship with that retailer and saying, okay, this is the book we have coming out. When would you like the next issue? Or you might be interested in this for your clients, because they know their clients better than anybody, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are your thoughts on like pull lists, like basically getting people to kind of go in and be like, hey, do you carry this? So like obviously you want to figure out who the ideal local comic shops are that'll actually shelf indie comics at all. But what about like if you've got a fan base, you've been building a newsletter or whatever from Kickstarter or just general marketing, and turns out you've got 20% of your audience in this one city in Florida, and you're like, okay, maybe I can chat with them to talk to their local comic shop. Mm-hmm. Do you find that to be valuable enough to pursue, or is it better to just get a relationship with the comic store owner?
Okay, so the very first thing is more and more owners and managers of the stores and their staff are not developing a relationship with their customers. Okay, their customer comes in, buys the books, there's no conversation going on, or if the conversation is happening, it's about the time of day or the weather or whatever. Okay, it's everything except the comics that they're actually buying. A lot of these retailers also aren't reading the material in advance to recommend those books to their customers. Okay, and part of the problem due to that is the whole distribution network right now, and how there's not one distributor. They now have 6 or 7 in some cases, I've been told, where they're spending so much time on the ordering process and setting up their store and the daily to-do list, that they don't have time to even go through a small percentage of the books and taking the time to read them. Unless you've read it, you can't recommend it. Now, with regards to pull lists, if as a retailer I don't know the material that I'm selling, okay, I don't know if your book is a science fiction story because I haven't read it, okay. So if someone reads science fiction, but I haven't read that this book is science fiction because it's not clear enough on the cover or in the title or whatever, then I don't know to recommend it to that person. Okay. Now, because some stores, their displays have that overlapping, the spines are mostly covered up and you can barely see any of the covers. People are required to work to rummage through those comics because the full covers aren't seen. Okay, that's part of the problem right off the bat. There's just too much product, and you can't isolate what it is that you could possibly be interested in. With pull list, if you don't know because you haven't been recommended the title, that means that you have to look online to something like League of Comic Geeks to find out what books are actually going to be coming out that week to see if there's any interest. You have to establish in your mind as a consumer if you might want this book or not. There are so many independent titles that go unnoticed because retailers don't know how to sell the book, and they don't have the time to even learn about the book to recommend it. So it's a major problem in retail.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Earlier, before we started the video, I was chatting about the getting like a sales sheet or like a one pager created. Do you think that that's probably a way to help that is simplify your comics so they don't have to read a whole comic? They can look at a single sheet and go, oh, I know what this is about. So it's like, this is a sci-fi with blank, blank, and blank. This is where you can order, the comic so that if they want quick access to it, give them a QR code, make it simple. Do you think that that's something indie creators could/should do in order to help retailers as well as themselves getting their comics into shops?
Anything that will get attention is always valuable. Okay. Does it mean that the retailer or the or whether the owner or the manager or the ordering body, I'll say that the ordering body, because sometimes it's the manager, sometimes it's the owner. If the ordering body has the time to read it or feels inspired to read it, because not all of it gets read, there's just too much of it sometimes, because everybody and their cousin is trying to get their comic, into that store. If they have it available and they read it, you're depending on them being interested enough to take that next step. Okay? So you have to make it interesting enough that they're going to want to research it a little bit more. Okay? And it has to be short because they don't have the time to dedicate to it. So realize always that with comics, with the first issue, it's the cover and it's the interior art. They don't know how well the story's going to sell until after the person has actually bought the first issue. So the consumer is interested in the art or the character or, but it's only after they've read the first issue that they get the story. And that's why the second issue falls half in sales, because they weren't interested enough by the story that not everybody's, buying the second issue, and they just drop off immediately after the first issue. But it's understanding what the interest is and the buying habits of those people. Obviously, cost is always, one of those things, because you're comparing buying your product versus buying this. And if your product is so expensive that you can't buy two of this comic because yours is so expensive that it would, result in them not being satisfied and not being able to buy these other two, then, it becomes a competition. But I do find that those kind of sheets are valuable. Just realize that just because you're providing the sheet doesn't mean that they're all going to read it.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's why I suggest going the route of developing a relationship with those retailers in advance, and identifying which ones they are, because those are the ones that are going to be looking forward to what it is you send them.
Yeah, you want them answering the phone like, oh, hey, Greg.
Yeah, and the ones who aren't interested are not the ones who are even going to take the time of day to print off that announcement.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So thanks for coming on.
This has been your master class.
I tried to cover all three things, the trade shows and the retail and the editing. So I hope I managed that.
No, that was pretty solid. It was awesome. Yeah, it's funny. I actually used that little note thing Greg was mentioning in the beginning. They have this little note section over here. No, that was very cool.
Yeah. So where can people find you? And
how do you want them to engage with you? Yeah.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn with this pretty little bald mug, and I'm on Facebook. And anybody who's interested in finding out more about editing, or our editors and novice or whatever, the Comic Book Editors Alliance is a private group. I'm the administrator and founder, and so I would be the one letting people in. creators who are interested in becoming editors or learning about editors, or actually hiring an editor can join the group. And we actually have editors in long standing in the industry. We've got Tom Brevoort and Mike Martz and Joe Illage. We've got, 30, 40-year veterans who are actually helping to teach the younger, more novice editors how to do editing in the industry. So it's a really cool group.
Very cool.
Yeah. I'm actually a part of that group.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So maybe you should be selling the group.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on, and
Very much.
yeah.
I look
pay you for this masterclass, and
What's that?
we'll pay you for this masterclass. So,
And if you want me on again anytime, let me know.
Definitely. No, we'll definitely have to have you back.
yeah. Stay after, because the download has to go through. So
Yep.
And then we're gonna talk about something.
Okay.